The latest on a mass shooting that happened today outside of a casino in Reno. Just a short time ago, police said the gunman who opened fire killed 3 people and injured 3 others. This happened around 7:30 this morning in the valet area of the Grand Sierra Resort. 5 of the victims were shot at the casino entrance, and another was shot and killed while driving through the parking lot. Minutes later, police arrived and confronted the suspect, leading to a shootout with officers. The suspected shooter was struck at least once. He was taken into custody and is now hospitalized in critical condition.
In total, 6 victims were shot. 3 of them are now deceased, 2 remain in critical condition, and 1 was released. At this time, we have no reason to believe there is a connection between any of the victims and the suspect, and we have no known motive by the suspect.
Authorities have not identified the suspect at this point. They say there is no obvious connection that he has to any of the victims who were shot today. Police do say there is no ongoing threat to the public.
Well, President Trump meeting today with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at his luxury golf resort in Scotland. The 2 leaders held bilateral talks at the Turnberry Golf Resort on Scotland's west coast. They discussed critical issues, including their recent trade agreement and the growing hunger crisis in Gaza.
I think before we get to phase 2, which is, what's going to happen afterwards, we want to get the children fed.
Certainly speaking for the British public and myself, seeing those images of starving children in particular are revolting.
Well, the meeting comes on the heels of the U.S. trade agreement with the EU. That framework sets a 15% tariff on most goods, while the EU has a 0% tariff on a range of American exports. The European nations will also buy $750 billion in U.S. energy and buy more American military equipment.
All right, joining us now for some more insight on this trade agreement with the EU is David McEwen, political science professor at Sonoma State University. Professor, good to see you. Always appreciate the time here. President Trump, he calls this EU agreement the biggest deal ever. And of course, it comes at a critical time for the president. He's faced a lot of questions about the lack of trade deals resulting from his sweeping tariffs so far. So how do we think President Trump got this done? And how much does this trade deal with the EU mean to the president politically?
All right, Heather, Alex, it's a nice Monday to join you because this is a huge week for the president. Huge. We have a lot of economic data coming forward, and you're starting off this week with this deal. This EU deal is one that the Europeans didn't want. It does advantage the United States. It has kind of sector by sector differences, and what I mean by that, it has automobile sector differences, pharmaceutical sector differences, but it's a big win for the president. The big elephant in the room, if you will, however, is what happens with China this week and whether or not that August 1st deadline is met, what happens with Canada and Mexico. You have deals with the UK, you have deals with the EU. That helps the president a lot. But if you kind of pan back from this with this week, you have GDP data that's reported, jobs data, personal consumer expenditures, like personal spending, if you will. You also have these trade and tariffs kind of negotiations going on. So this starts off what the White House believes will be a monumental week for their presidency, but it's a hugely consequential week for the economy and for the news moving forward. So pay attention this week. There's going to be a lot of moving elements. This is just the start of that.
Yeah, David, you mentioned that obviously this tariff agreement really a win for President Trump. Why did Europe sign on to it, do you think? And did it conclude it has more to lose from an all-out confrontation?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're buying European goods, you're paying about 1.2% on a tariff. Now you're going to pay 15%. Okay, so you might think that that's going to be a difficult element for yourselves, and consumers will bear this. The different sectors will bear this. But nonetheless, the Europeans were looking at an all-out trade war that might have been as high as 30%. So if you think about California and in your wine and spirits industry, that could be consequential. If you're in the auto parts industry or the electronics industry or, again, the pharmaceuticals industry, all of these sectors will be impacted differently. The market reacted immediately to this news by rising, but kind of settled back kind of even. And in that process, though, the market is looking for some reassurances given the uncertainty of tariffs. And the real uncertainty of that is related still to China. About 7%, 10% of the S&P profits are driven by what happens in China. So pay attention to movement for the Chinese government in the PRC negotiations this week, but also again with Canada and Mexico. They've only got 5 deals. They're not going to make the August 1st deadline. So what does this look like like in terms of downstream effects for what happens next for the Trump administration. A huge, huge economic week for economic data and for kind of the future direction of the country as we head to the second half of the year.
All right, beyond the trade talks for the president, another focus for him is trying to end the fighting in Ukraine. And we heard today from the president, he's putting new pressure on Vladimir Putin, setting a new, earlier deadline to reach a peace deal or face secondary tariffs on Russia's trading partners. The president said today that new deadline is 10 or 12 days from now. Originally, it was 50 days out. So why do we think we are seeing this shift from the president here in terms of his tone and how he's responding to Vladimir Putin? And how effective can this stepped up deadline be, you think?
I'm loving Mondays with you guys because look, this is finally the Trump administration has learned that Putin has been playing them. He's been playing them because he whispers intentions to end the war. That leads to some negotiation, but really this pushes Ukraine into a place where they consider a deal to be surrender. The Russian word is called maskirovka. Maskirovka means concealment or camouflage, but what it really means is kind of making a successful operation that your opponent doesn't know is going on. And that maskirovka kind of ideal is exactly what Vladimir Putin and the Russians have been playing, and the Trump administration has finally caught up to this. And they realize that face-to-face negotiations, they're going to hear one thing, but what's actually going to happen is the war is going to continue. So how do they move forward in this and provide some strategic ambiguity to the Russian government? That's what they're doing. It's taken them a long time, frankly, to understand this kind of component. It is a change moment. So you have this economic stuff going on in the background. You've got Epstein over all of this, and you've got Russia, you've got Gaza, you've got all of these situations happening. This really is a critical week for the Trump administration and what they decide and how they decide they're going to move forward here.
Yeah, obviously a lot for the administration to balance right now. David McEwen, always appreciate it, sir. Thank you.